I want to show you something. Now, you'd think he works at a graveyard, he's covered in mud and blood and piss and shit and entrails, and it's not a romantic job. You'd be wrong. Doesn't mean the ladies aren't interested. This Valentine's Day, I found waiting for me outside. I mean, I'm assuming it was for me. It was outside the door. No one will ever find your body as attractive as I do. Lying at the bottom of an abandoned mine shaft. I mean, it's the best Valentine's card I've had in a number of years. It's the only Valentine's card I've had in a number of years. See, zombies, you know they want to take your heart out. I don't know whether to trust this or not. Still, you know, at least somebody cares. I didn't need that though. If this person and I ever got together, we might go and see Heart Eyes, which came out this year. Which is kind of a throwback to sort of the late 90s, early 2000s slasher movies that were themselves a throwback to the 70s and 80s slasher movies. So really, this film is a throwback to a series of throwbacks. Not only that, but it doesn't throw back to the good slasher movies of the late 90s and early 2000s. It throws back to the ones that are kind of ripping off Scream. At that point in time, Scream came out and it was massive. It was self-referential. It was obsessed with itself and its own genre. But because it was so successful, a whole bunch of other movies came out that were very similar to it, that had somebody going around murdering teens, and then at the end of the movie they had a reveal as to who that person was. I Know What You Did Last Summer, perfect example. Urban Legend, Valentine, Cherry Falls. You've probably not heard of most of those. You've probably heard of I Know What You Did Last Summer, because there's another one coming out. But when Scream did so well, suddenly there was a boom in the slasher movie interest, but the films that followed weren't perfect. They were fun, they're okay, they're trashy, and if you were raised in that era, there's an element of nostalgia to them. But they're not great. Heart Eyes seems to want to focus on those as its point of reference. And has made itself, I think, potentially the first rom-com slasher movie, which is an interesting mix of genres. Shaun of the Dead did rom-coms back in the day. As a way of almost confirming that those 90s slashers were its influence, Devon Sawa and Jordana Brewster, who were in the Final Destination series and The Faculty, for example, two big kind of teen horror slashers from the early 2000s or late 90s. They play cops in this film, so there's a direct reference there. There's also a Hobbs and Shaw joke, which I'm assuming only exists because Jordana Brewster's in the film. Although she's not in Hobbs and Shaw, I guess Hobbs and Shaw are both in the Fast and Furious movies. I don't know if that was in the script before she joined the cast, or it was a very weird joke when it popped up on the screen. It made me laugh, but I've ruined it for you now. The chemistry between the two leads is pretty good. It's legitimately funny at times. Again, it's a kind of throwaway movie, but it's an enjoyable film. Something different to watch around the Halloween period. The mask design for the killer is quite interesting. It's literally kind of a leather head, not leather face, with kind of glowing neon heart eyes in there. There are a number of enjoyably gory kills. Nothing that's going to keep you up at night, but the practical effects guys earn their money on this one. There are big chunks of the film where the killer isn't really there, because we are following this couple that are starting to get to know each other. But as their chemistry is quite enjoyable anyway, it still sort of works. That does eventually get to the big silly reveal that we have in all of these late 90s, early 2000s slasher films. That does come in this. It's kind of expected. By the time it comes, you're still really none the wiser onto what's going on. There's no sense of realism in any of this. The killer's motivations are the most tenuously daft motivations you can imagine. But then that was always the case with those films anyway. Unlike the Friday the 13th and the Halloweens, actually in the original Friday the 13th, you didn't know who the killer was, so I'll give it that. But we all knew Jason Voorhees from the beginning. You know, he was the boy that drowned in the lake. That was the campfire story. Freddy Krueger was the guy that burned in the fire after being let off and acquitted. Michael Myers famously had Donald Pleasance running around telling everybody who he was and why he was free. It wasn't until the Scream series really where we didn't know who was doing the killing, and that became a running thing throughout slasher movies for the rest of that decade. It had existed before, but it really kind of became a thing for the rest of that decade. And Heart Eyes falls straight into that. You get a bunch of goofy reveals, which, sure, and then by the time the credits go up, you'll probably not remember anything that happened in that movie, but you know you'll have had a fun time with it, and that's really all that counts. It's definitely a better Valentine's Day slasher than the film Valentine with David Boreanaz in. That's one of those early 2000 movies that are definitely the inspiration for this, but this is a better film than that. Would I say it's better than My Bloody Valentine, either the original or the remake? I mean, it's probably less of a grindhouse film than that original My Bloody Valentine, particularly with all the effects put back in. That's a crunchy film. Same for the remake. The remake's just as fun. Although I would say this new film is definitely more of a date movie, has more of a sense of humor about itself, and is definitely something you could take someone to see without looking or feeling like you're taking them down some seedy horror back alley. Really, for my money, the only thing that was missing from it was a nu metal soundtrack. And that's not because I listen to nu metal anymore, or at least I wouldn't admit that to people if I was being tortured. But it would have fit in with this film. It would have fit the tone quite nicely, with it being specifically referencing a bunch of movies that, if the soundtracks are probably better than the films at this point. I mean, no, they're not, because they're nu metal, so I take that back instantly.